Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Cherie. Today is going to be another book recommendation video, and it's going to be all of my favorite books by Black authors. These are books that I have read and loved, books that have stuck with me for years, some since college, well, one since college. Let's just get into it. I have about 20 or so books that I'm going to talk about. I want to start out by talking about romance. I have romance, fiction, a couple thrillers, YA, and some nonfiction books that I'm going to talk about. I can't start this video or even do this video without obviously mentioning Kennedy Ryan. Kennedy Ryan is my number one. For her, like a book recommendation, anything by her. Everything by her is good. I don't think I've read anything by her that I dislike. Anything by Kennedy Ryan, you can't go wrong. My absolute favorite books by her are Before I Let Go, which came out, I believe, last year. It's super annotated, probably my most annotated book. It has every kind of annotation. And Queen Move, this might be like the one for me. Queen Move, I love this book so much, and I don't have it like tabbed, but I have it annotated inside. So this is about Ezra and Kimba, and they are basically childhood friends to lovers, and it is beautiful, a beautiful book. First series that I started out with her was All the King's Men, book 1 and 2. I discovered her, I think, at the beginning of 2021, and these were the first two books I read by her. They met when she was really young, and she's like an activist, and she later on in life becomes almost like if you want to win a campaign, like she's the one you get. Kind of follows their story. And then Queen Move is like the third companion novel to this series. And I feel like with her books, she writes like sweeping romance that we have to work for. It's emotional, not insta-lovey. You have to work for it. And sometimes the romance doesn't really take place right away, but when we get there, it's so worth it. And then her newest series that came out is Before I Let Go, and then This Could Be Us. That's the second book in the series, and I realized I don't have that book with me. I left it up there. This is the first one, and I love it so much. Anything by Kennedy Ryan. She writes Black romance. She writes romance where the main character is Black, or the main female character is Black. She writes romance where neither of the characters are Black. So I feel like she writes a good range of characters. You honestly can't go wrong with any of her books. I would say my second favorite romance author is Tia Williams. I have read 2 books by her. 7 Days in June is one of my favorite romance books. I think my top 3 romance books by Black authors, or in general, honestly, Queen Move by Kennedy Ryan, 7 Days in June by Tia Williams, and then we'll get to my third one in a second. I love this book so much, and it's perfect for the summer. It's about 2 writers who are kind of, they haven't really spoken in a long time, but when they were teens, they had this romance for 7 days, and then you flash forward between the past and the present, and it's 7 days in the past, their original meeting, and then you get 7 days with them in the present, them kind of like re-falling in love. And they are both writers, and you find out that they have been writing kind of like secret notes in a way to each other in their books. They know it. And it's just so beautiful. It's, again, heartbreaking, but so beautiful. And this book is also so annotated because I love it so much. And then this year, Tia Williams also came out with a book called A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, and this one's annotated, not as much. I think this book is really fun and whimsical and magical, and it's one of those books that takes place in kind of like 2 different timelines, and there's, I wouldn't say time travel, but there's definitely kind of these like magical, mystical elements. And I'm not going to say like the twist or when you get the kind of revelation. I'm not going to spoil it. But when you get to like the revelation, it's like, oh, that's really cool. And then I would say my third favorite romance book of all time is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emeze. When I think of this book, this is some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read. And I've heard that people don't consider this book a romance, but it's 1000% a romance. And it's between this young girl and this older gentleman, her friend's father. Technically, it's a romance between this young girl and the father of this guy she like kind of dated, but things don't really work out with her and that guy, but things do work out with her and the father. And it's honestly beautiful. I didn't think I would like it because I don't love age gap, but it was It was beautiful, honestly. It's beautiful because both of the characters are healing from loss and they kind of come together and bond through that. And it's so beautiful. They're on like vacation on this like awesome island. The vibes are there. And it's a fantastic book. One of my other favorite romance books, Open Water. This one is probably in the top, if I could have like a 3.5, top 3, top 4. Open Water is also one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. The writing in here, crowded London pub, two young people meet, both are Black British scholars. He's a photographer, she's a dancer. They're both trying to make their way in the world. And then they fall in love. This one's also annotated. If you notice, my favorite books are all annotated. Actually, there's a quote from this on my Instagram, but the quote is, "What is better than believing you are heading towards love?" This has some of the best quotes that I've ever read in here. I obviously have to include the Brown Sisters trilogy. I've only read number 1 and 2. I've heard great things about the third one. I've heard it's a lot spicier, and I can't believe I haven't read it at this point. This is my favorite one in the series. I actually listened to it on audiobook. This is the book that made me fall in love with Friends to Lovers. I used to think that enemies to lovers was my favorite genre, but friends to lovers is the ultimate. I don't know if I read it at the right time in my life. I don't know if I was in a friends to lovers situation at that time, but I love this book so much. Her and this man, Zafir. So he's a security guard where she works, and I guess he like rescues her from a workplace fire drill. I read this so long ago. They're friends. They've been friends for a long time. You know, there's a little bit of attraction there, and you know, she's very much like, I don't do relationships. Things kind of unfold between them, and they're like, we're gonna have friends with benefits. Obviously, things develop, and it's so good. This is the book that made me believe in friends to lovers. Now, a book that I never see anybody talk about is The Love Con, but I absolutely love this book. This book is, again, annotated also. I actually got this book from the library. I loved it so much that I just got my own copy and like transferred my annotations over. Because the library copy, I just tabbed it. When I got my own copy, I just transferred them over. But it's amazing because this is about a girl who, Kenya Davenport. She loves gaming, anime, things like that, and she enters like a cosplay competition. Her best friend Cameron, he has to be her fake boyfriend for the show that they're on because they're filming like a cosplay competition show. It's funny because they describe him as like a Thor kind of character, Thor kind of guy, and he has like Thor's hammer. It's fake dating, friends to lovers. It's amazing because it's like there's great plus size rep in this book, and if you're into like anime, like the nerdy girls, like I love reading about other nerdy girls, and that is this book. Nobody talks about this book, but it's emotional and funny, and it takes place in like a reality show, fake dating, friends to lovers. It's so fun. And she has a second book out, Cerestia Glass. I have started that one. I haven't finished it. It's called Game On, and that takes place in the gaming world. Now I'm gonna transition a little bit into, I guess you could call them the fiction books, but to me they all kind of actually still have romance in them. The romance is not like the main plot. It's almost like a subplot. The first book is Queenie. Queenie was my favorite book for a long time. It still is one of my favorites. They just released a series on Hulu of this book, but this was my favorite book for a long time. I even have UK copies. I have multiple copies of this book because when I read it, I was just like, why is this so relatable? Because Queenie just got broken up with. She is now navigating life as like a single girl and trying to figure herself out, and she has like her amazing group of girlfriends. One of the things I love about this book is that Queenie is messy because she's trying to figure it out, and there's a lot of talk about therapy and the Black community, but the conversations that they're having about Black women and Black people in general going to therapy, I think are really awesome and really important. It is a little bit hard to read. I've heard people's criticisms because Queenie does not make the best decisions, but it's like in life, nobody is perfect, and we all kind of make questionable decisions, and that's what I love about this book. It allows Queenie to be messy. Another one in the genre of kind of like messy Black girl, which they've called this the like ultimate millennial book, but it's Luster by Raven Leilani. I'm still waiting for Raven Leilani to write her next book, and I'm waiting patiently. She's doing other things, so that's fine. But I remember buying this book on a whim and loving it. I actually really want to read it again because it's about this young girl, Edie, who she's kind of like stumbling through her 20s, and she gets into this relationship kind of with this married white man and somehow she ends up not in a relationship but like befriending the wife also. And so it's this weird kind of like triangle situation that's going on. I really want to read it again and do a little bit more annotations. I feel like I barely did any. I didn't even write in it. All I did were some tabs. So I want to read this again, but this has been one of my favorite books for a long time. A book that really surprised me last year was Half Blown Rose. I never hear anybody talk about this, but it's called Half Blown Rose by Lisa Cross Smith. It's a love story essentially, but it's about this woman. She's a little bit older. Something happens with like her and her husband, and she decides to move to Paris to travel. She gets involved with this younger man in Paris, and things kind of unfold from there. I love that the character is in her 40s. I feel like I don't read a lot of books with characters in their 40s or 30s for that matter. I'm always looking for books about women in their 30s being in love and being happy, and I feel like this book is a lot about like self-exploration and figuring out what you want for yourself. It's almost like the Eat, Pray, Love for like the Black girls, and I love that. And this book is also tabbed but this is one of my favorite books, and I feel like we never ever talk about it. I never see anybody talk about it. I think more people need to read it. This book, When No One Is Watching, one of my favorite books by Alyssa Cole. It's a thriller, but Alyssa Cole is originally a romance writer, and she writes Black romance books, but this is her first thriller. And it's about gentrification in the vein of like Get Out, but it's about gentrification in New York City, and I'm gonna leave it there. This is a book to me that needs to be turned into a movie, and it needs to be directed by Jordan Peele. Like, that's just point blank period, and I need it to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. The next one is called Final Revival of Opal and Nev. I remember reading this book and having to look up if Opal was a real person, because that's how well researched this book feels. This feels like I was reading about a real rock band, about Opal and Nev. It's in the vein of Daisy Jones. If you like Daisy Jones, then you'll love this. They talk about something in this book, fashion show in Paris, and they mention like actual people that walked in that fashion show. And I literally had to look up things about it because I was like, this is real. This felt so real. If you like kind of like music doc kind of thing, this is the one. I really love this book. And then another thriller, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. I love S.A. Cosby. I've read Blacktop Wasteland, this one, and then there's one other. I read his new book. This is the first book I read by S.A. Cosby. It's about these two fathers, and their sons were married. Those two sons are found that they were murdered. And so the two dads are like, what the fuck? Pissed off, obviously, hurt, and they take matters into their own hands because the police is not doing anything about it. And they take matters into their own hands, and it talks a lot about forgiveness and kind of their relationships with their sons, and it really forces the two dads to kind of like look at themselves while they are trying to find their son's murderer and find out what happened to them. It's a great story, and I love S.A. Cosby. So now we're moving on to YA. I used to read a lot more YA. Don't read as much YA now, but one of my favorite books is called Ace of Spades. I don't normally stay up at night where I'm like, just one more chapter. And I remember this book, I stayed up very late to read it. I kept reading, and I was like, okay, one more chapter. And I annotated this too a lot, and it's so good. It's basically about private academy, and Devon and Chiamaka, I believe is how you pronounce her name. Chiamaka maybe. They are selected to be part of the school's like elite group, but then they start to realize that things are not as what they seem, and they start to dig a little bit deeper into the history of their school and the history of the group that they're joining. And things are not as what they seem, and things start to go awry. The cover of this book and the title are very important, and I didn't realize that until I was reading, and I raved about the cover after because I was like, wow, Ace of Spades, and the title and the cover. When you read the book, you'll understand that, but I was like, wow. Okay, another book I love Slay. This was one of my favorite books for a long time. It's just about this young girl, and she is a video game creator. Her name is Kiara, and she's 17. She's this young black video game creator, and one day one of the people like in the game dies, but in real life. And so then people are kind of starting to criticize like the game and the gaming world. And I feel like this book does a good job at talking about the gaming world and women in the gaming world, being black in the gaming world, and how dangerous that can actually be. I think this book is really great. I don't see anybody talking about it, but we need to be, because it's like if we like Ready Player One and if we like these other gaming books, like we need to be giving Slay a chance. It's really, really good, and it features a black girl and like a black girl in gaming. We need to be reading this. I could not mention Legendborn. I feel like I read this so long ago. I have to reread this before I read Bloodmarked. And then I think the third book was just announced, the cover reveal. So I think we thought this was going to be a duology at first, and then it turned into a trilogy. I read this like right when it came out in 2020. 2020 sounds like forever ago. It doesn't even seem real, honestly. This follows Bree, and she goes to UNC Chapel Hill. She joins this like secret society, and it follows Arthurian legend. And there is kind of a love triangle in here. There is the secret society that she joins is very interesting because things are not what they seem. There's a little bit of magical elements, and it's a good book. I need to reread it. Just for the love triangle too, because I remember that being really good. A couple other books that I have, Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is actually a really hard book in my opinion to read. Enchanted Jones, okay? She wants to be a young singer, and she kind of gets taken under the wing of Corey Fields, who is this like young up and coming singer, and so she's like entranced by his wealth and his luxury, and he kind of takes her under his wing. But what you don't realize, and what's so hard to read, is that he is essentially grooming her, and the things that he puts her through are very unsettling. People were saying that this is a take on the R. Kelly thing, but Tiffany D. Jackson made it a point to say that this is not really about that, but it's about the girls who didn't have a voice. It is upsetting to read. Upsetting. Like, I was livid while reading this book, but it's so good. And this cover is just, can we just look at the cover? So I also have The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert. I love Brandy Colbert. I think I've read maybe 3 or 4 of her books. She writes predominantly YA. She just came out with a book about Tulsa, which I really need to read. I think she came out with that maybe like a year or so ago. But this book I think is really, really important, especially around an election. I read it around the election in 2020. It talks a lot about just like the things that people will do to stop people from voting. Their whirlwind day begins, rushing from precinct to precinct, cutting school and waiting in endless lines, turned away time and time again, trying to do one simple thing: vote. They may have started out as strangers, but as Duke and Marva team up to beat a rigged system, it's clear that there's more to their connection than a shared mission for democracy. So there's also a little romance, which we love. I think this is a great book for young people to read, especially if they want to learn more about like voting, voter rights, and when people are, I keep forgetting what the word is, but when you try to go to a voting place and you literally cannot vote, and how fucked up that is. And then I also have Black Girl Unlimited. I never see anybody talk about this book, but this is written by Echo Brown. I believe Echo Brown passed away this year, unfortunately, but this book is so beautiful. It's just a coming of age story of Echo. It's of her. It's the author's kind of coming of age story. It's part memoir, part magic, and it's just a coming of age story of this young wizard. It's really beautiful, and I was crying at the end. I don't cry very often in books. I was crying at the end of this. Okay, so that's all the YA have, and so I'm gonna wrap up the video with a couple of nonfiction. I do not read nonfiction. Like, I like the idea of nonfiction, and it's funny because I love documentaries, but I don't really read a ton of nonfiction, which maybe I should, but there's just a couple nonfiction books that I want to talk about in this video. The first one is Notes from a Young Black Chef. This is a great book. If you're into the culinary world, into cooking, if you like The Bear, if you like anything having to do with cooking, this is the book. And it takes place in New York, and because he grew up in the Bronx, contestant on Top Chef, and he actually has a restaurant right now in New York City, and I heard it's really hard to get a reservation, but I would love to get one. That would be amazing. It's about his story and how he grew up in the Bronx, how he got into cooking, how his mom is a caterer cater, how he got into catering, just the grind that cooking is, and him being at different restaurants. And the story is so engaging and it's so good. I love reading like cooking memoirs. I think that's, if I were to read nonfiction, I think cooking memoirs is like one of my favorite genres. But this is his story. It's a great story of just how he made it and how he ended up doing the presidential dinner for Obama, which is a huge deal. Their nonfiction book that I love is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. There's a movie that came out with Michael B. Jordan, I believe. Everyone should read the book. It's about Bryan Stevenson, and he's like a young lawyer, and he founded the Equal Justice Initiative, and he basically helps people that are sentenced to death, are on death row, and he kind of helps them navigate the criminal justice system. What I like about this book is I felt like I learned so much about our criminal justice system, about the prison system, just things about how unjust and unfair and horrendous it actually is, and how it's a lot of it is for profit. And the story kind of goes between like him starting his company and what they do. Also, he helps this guy Walter McMillan. It's like one of his first cases, and he is sentenced to death. He's on death row for a crime that he didn't commit, and so he's helping him try to get off of death row. And it really like kind of had him questioning everything about the justice system, and it sheds a lot of light on things that I didn't know about the justice system or the prison system. I clearly highlighted so many things that I didn't realize that I used a bright blue highlighter to annotate. And it even talks about recovery and how we need to do a better job at setting up systems where when people come out of prison, they can be helped and integrate back into the world, because that also I can imagine is very hard. So this is a really great book if you're into kind of like the justice system and you want to learn more about it. I think this is a great book. Last but not least for like nonfiction is Viola Davis's book. The book is called Finding Me. It's her memoir. She won a Grammy for it, which in turn gave her an EGOT, which is amazing. And it's about her life. She reads the audiobook, which is amazing, and she talks about being poor, as she calls it, like being very, very poor, where her and her sisters, they would go to school and they smelled like pee, they weren't able to shower, they didn't have food. It was kind of wild when you think about like Viola Davis now, because, you know, she even talks about how she was in all these like little roles. And like when we think of Viola Davis, we think about her as like Viola Davis from The Help and from, for me, How to Get Away with Murder and Fences. And she's just been in so many good movies, but she also started out in theater. She also did a lot of television shows where she was like a television regular. And it feels like when you listen to her story that she didn't like make it until she was a lot older, which is like an amazing thing to see. And to think about Viola Davis not being Viola Davis, or have her think that she's not like that girl, is crazy to me. Because to me, like, Viola Davis is that girl. Like, her story is so amazing, and to hear her read her story, I was getting emotional during some of it. I don't get emotional during audiobooks. I was getting emotional listening to her audiobook and just like all the struggles that she's been through, and to see like where she is now, even with her and her husband. It's just amazing. Like, they have such an amazing relationship, and I loved like hearing her talk about like how she got to be like the Viola Davis, you know, and her first role with like the Oscar in Doubt, that was like a huge deal. Her getting nominated for, she's on screen for less than 5 minutes. Like, it's amazing. And she talks about The Help, how there's a lot of controversy behind that movie and how people didn't want her to do that movie, and how she kind of almost regrets doing the movie. And I just think that's so interesting. I love that memoir, and I think it's amazing. But there's one book I left out because this has been my favorite book since college, and it is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, not to be confused with The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. I feel like people get it confused, even though it's about two very different things. In college, I read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison for the first time, and I think about that book daily since college, and I've been out of college for over 11 years. I wrote an entire paper on being invisible as a Black person in America, and the different ways that we are invisible, where people inflict a certain type of stereotype onto us, erasing our actual selves, or people just don't see you, don't acknowledge you, to actually feeling invisible as a Black person. And it is an amazing book. It's about being a Black man in America. I love that book so much. It is my favorite book of all time. If we're talking classics, I love that book, Invisible Man. Everybody go read it. So different than my Kennedy Ryans or my Tessa Williams or even my Queenies. You know, it's so different, but it is a very, in my opinion, very important book, and a very important book to me, huge part of my life, and I will forever love that book. That's it. Those are just some of my favorite books by Black authors. I hope that you read some of these and you love them also. And again, if you made it this far, thank you. Thank you, as I always say. Like, comment, subscribe, all the fun stuff. And until next time, bye.